The spoon was cold against my palm, not the kind of cold that comes from winter or fear, though I had known plenty of both. This was different. This was the cold of something frozen, something sweet, something that had no right to exist in a place like this. I stared at the bowl in front of me, white, smooth, glistening under the harsh Arizona sun that poured through the mesh windows of the mess hall. The other women around me had gone silent, completely silent. We had learned silence well over the past 3 years. Silence kept you alive, kept you unnoticed, kept you from asking questions that might get you killed. But this silence was different. This was the silence of disbelief. My name is Greta Hoffman. It is June 19th, 1945. I am a prisoner of war at Camp Florence, Arizona. 3 weeks ago, I was pulled from the ruins of a field hospital outside Bremen, my hands still stained with the blood of boys who called for their mothers as they died. I expected execution. I expected starvation. I expected the Americans to do to us what we had been told they would do. I did not expect ice cream. Eat it before it melts, the guard said. He was young, maybe 22, 23. His uniform was crisp. His face was kind. That was the part I couldn't understand. The kindness. I lifted the spoon. The ice cream, vanilla, they called it, slid across my tongue like something from a dream I'd had before the war, before the bombs, before the camps, before everything turned to ash and screaming. It tasted like betrayal. If this story moves you, if you want to hear the voices history tried to bury, subscribe to Lost Voices of War, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Because these stories belong to all of us now. The first time I saw the dessert cart, I thought it was a trick. We had been at Camp Florence for 11 days. 11 days of waiting for the cruelty to begin. 11 days of clean beds and hot water and food that didn't taste like sawdust and shame. 11 days of wondering when the Americans would stop pretending and show us who they really were. But the cart kept coming. Every other day, sometimes 3 times a week, the guards would wheel it into the mess hall after dinner. It was wooden, painted white, with 2 large metal containers that sweated condensation in the desert heat. The wheels squeaked. That squeak became the sound of cognitive dissonance, a noise that announced something my brain refused to process. Inside those containers, ice cream, chocolate, vanilla, sometimes strawberry, though that was rarer. The guards would scoop it into small metal bowls, military issue, the same bowls we ate our stew from, and hand them out like it was the most natural thing in the world, like we were people. Ingrid sat across from me that first time. She was from Hamburg, a radio operator who'd been captured near the Danish border. Her hands shook as she held her spoon. Not from fear, though, we all carried that, but from something else. Something that looked like grief. "Why are they doing this?" she whispered. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Lizelle, beside me, younger than both of us, 19, maybe 20, hadn't touched hers at all. She just stared at it, watching it melt into a pale puddle at the bottom of her bowl. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying earlier, though she tried to hide it. She cried most nights. "My brother," she said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the low hum of conversation around us. "My brother died in a camp, a work camp, in Poland." She didn't need to say more. We all knew what kind of camp she meant. The kind where people didn't get ice cream. The kind where people didn't get anything except hunger and work and death. They gave him nothing, she continued, her voice cracking. Nothing. And now they give us this. The spoon in my hand felt heavier. I thought about the things I had seen. The things I had done. Not the dramatic things. I wasn't a soldier, wasn't a guard in those places, but the small things. The turning away. The not asking. The choosing to believe the lies because believing the truth would have required courage I didn't have. And now here I was, eating ice cream in an American prison camp, and the contradiction was so sharp it felt like swallowing glass. The guard's name was Corporal Matthews. I learned this 3 days after the ice cream incident, when he stopped by our barracks during evening count. He was the one who usually supervised our meal times, the one with the kind face that made everything worse. "You ladies settling in all right?" he asked. The question was absurd. We were prisoners. Settling in wasn't a category that applied to us, but he asked it anyway, with genuine interest in his eyes, and that made it even more absurd. Ingrid was the brave one. She had always been braver than me. "Why do you feed us like this?" she asked. Her English was better than mine. She'd worked with British broadcasts before the war. We are prisoners. We are your enemy. Corporal Matthews looked confused by the question, like she'd asked him why the sky was blue or why water was wet. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you're prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. We're required to feed you adequately." "Adequately," Ingrid repeated. "Ice cream is adequate?" He smiled then, not a cruel smile, not a mocking smile, just a smile. "Well," he said, "it's hot out here. Figured you could use something cold." That was it. That was his entire justification. It's hot out. You could use something cold. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by his clean uniform and shake him, and make him understand that mercy with no logic behind it was the cruelest thing of all. Because if the Americans could be kind for no reason, if they could give ice cream to their enemies just because it was hot outside, then what did that say about us? About the side we had been on? About the things we had allowed? But I didn't scream. I just nodded. And that night, I lay in my clean bed with my clean sheets and my full stomach, and I wept. By the third week, we had established a routine: wake at 600 hours, breakfast at 700 hours, eggs, bread, sometimes bacon, coffee that was real coffee, not the roasted barley substitute we'd been drinking since 1943. Work detail at 800 hours. We helped in the camp laundry, sorted supplies, did light maintenance. Nothing difficult, nothing cruel. Lunch at 1200 hours, dinner at 1800 hours, and every few days, dessert. The ice cream became a kind of barometer for our psychological state. Some of the women began to accept it, even enjoy it. They would talk about flavors, compare preferences, smile at the guards who served them. Others, like Liesel, still couldn't touch it. She would take her bowl and immediately give it away or let it melt untouched. I existed somewhere in the middle. I ate it because not eating it felt like a performance, like I was trying to prove something to myself or to God or to history, but I never enjoyed it. Every spoonful tasted like a question I couldn't answer. One evening, a woman named Clara, older than most of us, maybe 40, from Berlin, started laughing at dinner. Not a small laugh, a big, uncontrolled laugh that made everyone turn and stare. "What's funny?" Ingrid asked carefully. "We all worried about cracking. The human mind can only handle so much contradiction before it breaks." Clara wiped her eyes. "I just realized," she said, "that I eat better here than I did at home. For the last 2 years of the war, I ate better here, as a prisoner, than I did as a free woman in Berlin." The silence that followed was deafening. Because she was right. We all knew she was right. The Reich had been starving us long before the Americans captured us. The promises of victory and glory had been replaced with ration cards and empty shelves, and the constant, gnawing hunger that made you willing to believe anything if it meant another slice of bread. And now here we were, prisoners of the enemy, eating eggs and bread and ice cream. The logic of it made no sense, and yet it was undeniable. It was during the 4th week that they brought in the newspapers. Someone, maybe Corporal Matthews, maybe another guard, had decided that we should have access to news. Real news, not propaganda, not carefully curated information designed to shape our thoughts, but actual newspapers from American cities. The first headline I saw made my blood turn cold. "Concentration camp liberated. Thousands found dead at Bergen-Belsen." The photographs were worse than the words. I had known. Of course I had known. You couldn't live in Germany during the war and not know something. But knowing in the abstract, knowing that bad things were happening to people you never saw, was different from seeing the evidence spread across a newspaper in black and white. The bodies, the living skeletons, the children. Ingrid dropped the paper and ran outside. I heard her retching behind the barracks. Liesel sat frozen, staring at the photographs with an expression I couldn't read. Clara covered her face with her hands. That evening, no one ate their ice cream. Corporal Matthews noticed. Of course he noticed. "You ladies all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Always gentle. That was the worst part. "How can you feed us?" Liesel finally asked, her voice raw. "How can you give us this food, this comfort, after what we did, after what our country did?" Matthews was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "Because," he said, "we're not them. And you're not them either. You're prisoners. And we're going to treat you like prisoners should be treated, the way we'd want our boys treated if they were in your position." "But we don't deserve," Liesel started. "Doesn't matter," Matthews interrupted. Not unkindly. It's not about deserving. It's about who we choose to be. Who we choose to be. The words hung in the air like smoke. It was July when things shifted again. The war in the Pacific was still raging, but in Europe, everything had ended. We were no longer prisoners of an ongoing conflict. We were prisoners of a concluded one. The difference felt enormous. They started offering us choices. Small ones, but choices nonetheless. We could volunteer for additional work details, helping in the camp kitchen, assisting with administrative tasks, teaching German to guards who would be stationed in occupied territories. I volunteered to help in the library. It was a small room in one of the administrative buildings, filled with books in English and German. My job was to catalogue them, organize them, help other prisoners find reading material. It was quiet work, peaceful work. One afternoon, I found a book of American poetry. I couldn't read much of it. My English was still limited, but one poem caught my attention. It was by someone named Walt Whitman. The guard on duty, an older man named Sergeant Pike, noticed me struggling with it. "Want me to read it to you?" he asked. I nodded. His voice was rough, but kind as he read. "The whole theory of the universe is directed unerringly to one single individual, namely, to you." He paused. "It's about dignity," he explained. "About how every person matters, every single one." I thought about that poem for days. Every single one. Even the people on the wrong side. Even the people who had been part of something monstrous. Even me. The ice cream kept coming. Some days I ate it. Some days I didn't. But slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice. It stopped tasting like betrayal. It started tasting like something else. Like possibility. Like the chance that maybe, just maybe, the story didn't have to end with who we had been. That maybe there was space for who we might become. August brought new prisoners, women from other camps, other cities. Each one arrived with the same expression we must have worn: confusion, fear, disbelief. And each one went through the same process. We had the shock of clean beds, real food, and yes, ice cream. Watching them helped me understand something I hadn't been able to articulate before. The ice cream wasn't just food, it was a message. It said, "You are still human, even when you don't feel human. Even when you've seen and done things that make you question whether you deserve humanity. Even when the weight of collective guilt threatens to crush you. You are still human. And humans deserve basic dignity." I started helping the new arrivals. Explaining the routine. Answering their questions. Telling them that yes, this was real. And no, it wasn't a trick. And yes, it was okay to accept it. One woman, her name was Monica, from Stuttgart, asked me the question that had haunted me since the beginning. How can they be so kind? I thought about Corporal Matthews, about Sergeant Pike, about the dozens of American guards who treated us not as monsters, but as people who had made terrible mistakes, who had been part of a terrible system, but who were still, fundamentally, people. Because, I said slowly, they believe that's what separates them from what we became, the choice to show mercy even when mercy isn't deserved. Monica cried. We all cried a lot in those days, but the crying felt different now, less like despair, and more like grief, real grief, the kind that acknowledges what was lost, and what was done, and what can never be undone. The kind of grief that might, eventually, lead to something like redemption. September brought news of the Japanese surrender. The war was over, completely over, and with it came new questions. What happens to us now? Where do we go? What waits for us back in Germany? The ice cream kept coming, but it felt different now, less like a shock and more like a ritual, a small sweetness in the midst of uncertainty. On my last evening at Camp Florence, they were transferring us to processing centers, preparing us for eventual repatriation. I sat in the mess hall one final time. They served chocolate ice cream that night, my favorite, though I'd never told anyone that. Ingrid sat beside me, Lizelle on my other side, Clara across from us. The four of us had become a kind of family in this strange place, sisters in confusion and grief and slow, painful understanding. "I don't want to go back," Lizelle said quietly. None of us did. Germany was destroyed. Our cities were rubble. Our country was divided, occupied, facing a reckoning that would take generations. But more than that, going back meant leaving behind this strange grace we'd experienced. This place where we'd been treated better than we deserved, where we'd been given space to begin processing what we'd been part of. Do you think they'll have ice cream in Germany? Ingrid asked, and despite everything, we laughed. Corporal Matthews stopped by our table one last time. Safe travels, ladies, he said. I hope you find peace. Peace. Such a simple word, such an impossible goal, but, as I took my last spoonful of ice cream, sweet and cold and impossibly kind, I thought maybe it wasn't completely impossible. Maybe peace wasn't something you found. Maybe it was something you built, one small choice at a time. One moment of choosing mercy over cruelty. One instance of treating others as human even when they'd forgotten how to treat themselves that way. The ice cream melted on my tongue. And for the first time since arriving at Camp Florence, I didn't taste betrayal or guilt or confusion. I tasted hope. I returned to Germany in October of 1945. The country I found was not the country I had left. Nothing was the same. The cities were destroyed. The people were broken. And the truth of what we had been part of was impossible to ignore. But I carried something with me. A memory of kindness when kindness wasn't deserved. A reminder that humanity persists even in the darkest places. A lesson that mercy is not weakness, it is the hardest, bravest choice we can make. I never forgot the ice cream. Not because it was delicious, though it was. Not because it was unexpected, though it certainly was that. But because it taught me that the measure of a civilization is not how it treats its heroes. It's how it treats its enemies, its prisoners, the people who have no power, no leverage, no reason to expect kindness. And in that measure, I learned something about America that I had not been told. Something that contradicted everything we had been taught during the war. They were not monsters, they were just people. People who chose, even when it was difficult, to hold on to their humanity. I spent the rest of my life trying to do the same. If this story moved you, subscribe to Lost Voices of War and share where in the world you're watching from. These are the stories history tried to bury, but together, we're digging them back up. The ice cream at American POW camps was real. The Geneva Convention required adequate food, but American forces often exceeded those requirements, believing that treating prisoners humanely reflected their values. For many German prisoners, especially those who had witnessed or been part of Nazi atrocities, this unexpected kindness created a profound cognitive dissonance, one that forced them to confront what their nation had become and what they had allowed. This is the story of that reckoning, one cold, sweet spoonful at a time.